Okay, I'm going to gently start. Good morning, all. Welcome. Hope you're doing okay. This is our webinar, Practical Steps to Mitigate the Madness. Myself, Ross Meadows.
Good morning.
Hugh Williams.
Morning.
Simon Walsh.
Morning all, or afternoon if you're in the Southern Hemisphere.
And my sister Juliet Uri.
Morning, morning.
Thank you. So let's begin. We're Uri Clark. We're a multidisciplinary professional firm. Basically, that means lawyers and accountants. We're trying to provide some guidance to clients through the crisis. Some of these slides are reasonably detailed, so hopefully when you're sent them, you can read them and it will make sense. Questions at the end, but please raise them at any time. We are likely not to do one of these next week. Hopefully most of the law has come out, and it's really something we're doing dependent on need. So we will do one next time we feel it's necessary. We're not going to repeat things too much. You can watch the previous episodes on YouTube. Yes, we're recording it. We'll put it on YouTube. We will share the slides, and both webinars are live. But have slightly different content depending on the Q&A. Okay, so we're definitely not out the woods. I think we just got in them, and we're now deep in the forest, so to speak. Most of the law is out. It is lacking detail, but thanks to numerous people, the institutes, organizations, professionals of all shapes and form, the picture is at least getting fathomable. And I think we just advise you to try and make pragmatic decisions and stick with the spirit of the reliefs. This is the calm before the storm. A lot of businesses, indeed most of them, probably still have a little bit of cash in the bank, may even still have a little bit of work, but there's no doubt there is something of epic proportions coming. It's also rather eerie because we're all safe in our houses with our families, you know, discussing our 1970s meals. You know, so I think that's making us perhaps a little complacent or, you know, comfortable. But the reality is we're facing the worst crash, certainly of my generation, worse than 2008. Serious unemployment is likely to happen. You know, America's talking about 40 million perhaps unemployed. Currently, I think they have 3 million or something. And the public perception, I think, from a lot of people from the media is the government is going to help everybody. So it's okay, everything will be okay. Just please don't be under that illusion. The government's going to do what it can to help those most in need, to help the strong survive, but it is limited, and it is expected everyone's supposed to share the struggle. This isn't a blip and then business as usual. And a little bit like we had a run on the toilet roll, the banks only have so much cash. So there's, you know, the banks are going to be very cautious. I mean, Hugh will talk more about that later. So, you know, arriving in a Ferrari and pushing to the front of the dole queue, if you excuse the slightly grotesque analogy, you know, is the same, you know, using these emergency measures to raise venture capital or carry on as business as usual without, you know, doing everything you can to cut and minimize. It is not effectively acceptable, it would seem. You know, the measures here are to sustain business. So the spirit is war. And I mean, this is, you know, quite a shocking statistic, really. The entire death for the UK, for the United Kingdom during World War II, that's everyone who died due to military action, whether being bombed on in the UK or fighting, or is 450,000 people. The coronavirus without a lockdown is estimated could kill 500,000 people. And actually, this isn't right. It would be in 6 months by August. You know, so what took 5-6 years during the Second World War, they were suddenly thinking it's going to take 6 months here. Obviously, nobody knows. You know, they're aiming for this good result of £20,000 with the 20,000 deaths with the lockdown, but that is quite optimistic. And I think they're trying not to, you know, scare people. So yeah, it's a little bit heavy, but you know, spring has sprung. And a good client said to me once, I'm an entrepreneur and change means opportunity. So I like change. So I think that is the spirit in which, you know, we all need to set our minds. So back in calm land, here are the 7 things we think that are useful to know this week. So passing on to my good friend Ross.
Yeah, so furlough, what do we know now? It's a word that's only been around in UK employment law for 2 weeks. I've got to say I'm already sick to death of it, and I'm hoping that the sooner it's confined to the history books, the better. Hopefully that's a sign that things are going to get better. So what do we know? What is it? What is furlough? Well, it's a government grant to pay part of wages of staff who would have otherwise been laid off because of the coronavirus pandemic. Remember, it's a grant to businesses. It's not a grant where the government will pay staff directly. So you've got to continue paying staff, and then you look to apply for a grant for the government for part of their wages. It's currently a temporary scheme, open for at least 3 months. So it started on the 1st of March. It'll end on the 31st of May. It may be extended. And who does it apply to? Well, it's all UK employers with a PAYE scheme created or started before the 20th of February 2020. But the key thing is, which employees does it apply to? Well, it can apply to even those on 0 hours. It's a wide range: full-time, part-time, irregular hours, 0 hours contracts. It all applies to the above. They have had to have been on the UK payroll on or before the 20th of February, and they have had to have had no work after the 28th of February. So if any members of staff were on unpaid leave, for example, you started a process with them before that date, they wouldn't be entitled to furlough. Likewise, anyone who started for you after the 28th of February wouldn't be entitled to furlough if they are now in a situation where they would be laid off. So what about work? Well, there has to be no work at all. If people are on reduced hours, they can't be furloughed. There has to be no work at all for the employees. But what the new guidance has said is that they employees can undertake voluntary work, but that doesn't mean that they can say, "Oh, I'll do some work for you," to the employer. It's volunteering in other things like supporting the health service. So it's not for the employer. That's our emphasis here. But they can undertake training so long as it does not provide services or generate revenue for the business. How do you implement it? Well, it is subject to normal employment law principles. In most cases, no one will have a contractual right to temporarily lay off staff. So it will need the employee's express written agreement to do this. It does involve consultation. You need to explain the situation to staff so they understand. I think most staff will get this. If 20 or more staff could be affected, there may be collective consultation obligations, particularly if staff refuse to furlough. I think in most cases, what I've found in my experience is that people have agreed to furlough. I had one client that basically in 24 hours had to furlough 44 members of staff, and they all agreed. The key thing for furlough is that it has to be implemented in minimum blocks of 3 weeks. If it's less than 3 weeks, you will not be able to claim the grant. It has to be for at least 3 weeks. What does that tell us? It tells us that potentially you could have people on furlough for 3 weeks and then take them off for a period of time before returning them to furlough. So maybe you can chop and change with your staff. If there's an issue where some staff are complaining, why do I have to be furloughed on less pay when my colleague over there is working full time? So that might be there might be an opportunity there. You will need to continue to pay staff. That's my emphasis. Whether you've agreed to pay them at their full salary or you've reached agreement on a lower level of pay, subject to the furlough cap. I know I'm aware that some employers have sought to defer the pay. My view on that is that it's fraught with difficulty because you've got to provide the info to HMRC to get the money and the grant. But if you're really in a situation where the business is on the brink and you don't have the money, but you want to retain staff, then I think it's a last resort. How much can you claim? Well, they've now clarified that it's the lower of 80% of an employee's regular wage, so their base salary, or which is capped at £2,500 per month, plus the associated employer national insurance contributions and minimum auto enrolment employer pension contributions, so the 3% on that subsidised wage, so on that 80% or £2,500. Commissions, bonuses, employer pension contributions over and above the minimum requirements are not included. For most employees who are on a regular salary, it should be a relatively straightforward calculation. For employees that hours vary week by week, for example, 0 hours workers, it's a bit more complicated, but we've produced a quick guide, which once you get the slide, you can click on the link to, and it explains how you would work out what you can claim. How about the HMRC portal where you have to go through that to claim the grants? That should be ready by the end of April. Again, in our quick guide, we've got details of what information you should start compiling now. And anyone who's a payroll client at Ori Clark, we will look to support you, as well as other businesses who are not payroll clients.
Thanks, Ross.
And then on the back of furlough, just one thing to mention on furlough, there's a rumour that the Department of Business Innovation and Skills are going to provide even more guidance. So there might be more guidance. If there is, we will obviously update you all. But something else that's changed in the employment law sphere in the last week is emergency legislation to allow for carryover of holiday. And this has been enforced since Saturday, and what these regulations allow, it allows the restriction on carrying over untaken annual leave into the next leave year. Just to put this into perspective, employees are entitled, who work full-time, are entitled to 28 days per year as a minimum. The first 20 days of that 28 days leave cannot be carried over. You can carry over by agreement in your contract anything over and above the 20. So what these rules relate to are the first 20 days where it is not reasonably practicable to take that leave in the year as a result of the effects of coronavirus. And that could be the effects of it on the employee, the company, or the wider economy or society. So it's pretty flexible, and what it allows employees and employers to do is allow for that first 20 days to be carried over into the next 2 leave years. So if your leave year is the 1st of January to the 31st of December, that leave from this year can be carried over up to 31st of December 2022, and if your leave year is actually the 1st of April to the 31st of March, for this leave year, it will allow carryover until 31st of March 2023. Just to bear in mind, on that 20 days, we obviously have 8 days public holidays. So if your employees take their public holidays, that leaves 12 of this 20 days leave to carry over into the next 2 leave years. And it does not apply to the additional 8 days that you get by law and any contractual leave over and above the minimum entitlements. You just need to consider your employment contracts to see what it says in respect of that type of leave. Some employers have brought in temporary policies to allow some carryover where they didn't previously. You just got to bear in mind that it only applies to the employees who are unable to take the leave because of the work commitments and sickness. maybe also furlough. We're waiting for further guidance on whether you can take holiday during furlough. But what I would say overall is that you should try and encourage your staff to take at least 20 days in the leave year, if not more, because although no one's able to travel anywhere for some time, I think it's good to give people a break where necessary. So as employers, you can enforce holiday on your staff. This may be allowed under your contract or by law, where you need to give 2 days notice for each day of holiday you require your employees to take. So it's worth bearing in mind that I would actively encourage that you ask employees to take holiday during this leave year where possible.
Because you're trying to avoid, Ross, I guess, getting to what, the September or something, and the whole, 50% of your staff trying to take a holiday, as it were.
Yeah, the situation you could face is everyone wants to go on holiday. Everything's back to normal. Everyone's got, well, I'd like a bit of holiday now, and the business can't cope with everyone off, and it's very difficult to say, I'm really sorry, but you can't take your holiday now. So I think it's to avoid those types of scenarios, but also just thinking about your employees' mental health. Just give them a bit of time off from work, because in some sectors people will be very busy during this period. I think a break is good, even if it is in the home.
Thanks, Ross. Juliet, visas, eh?
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Andy. So visas, some of you have them, some of you still need one. So hopefully I'm going to summarize the kind of headlines currently. This COVID-19 is obviously like nothing else, nothing we have ever experienced. And unfortunately, no one is going anywhere. We are spending a great deal of time with people stuck. So one of the main issues is that the processing centres are closed, both here in the UK and overseas. So whilst our borders technically in the UK still remain open, there are obviously very limited flights, very limited trains to get into the UK. So a number of people are stuck. Thus far, the joy of our Home Office has issued very limited guidance. I am hoping after some time, when they realise that this might be the status quo, that they will issue greater guidance and we will get matters moving. But for now, there is very little movement. So if you are overseas, so outside of the UK, so New Zealand, Australia, America, Canada, any of those countries, you can complete an application, you are able to submit, but because the processing centres are closed, it is going to go no further. So I would suggest that unless you are desperate, you don't bother at this stage making that application until the processing centres are open. There are some individuals that we're having to deal with that had, before the lockdown, got their 30-day visa in order to be able to come to the UK and are still stuck. Technically, at the moment, the Home Office hasn't provided any guidance. We are campaigning to get those visas extended, or for the border to allow people to come in despite the 30-day lapse. But at the moment, all we can suggest is that you apply for a replacement visa, although in practical terms, you're not going to get it because obviously the processing centres are closed. And if you can go to the next, there are then those that I'm dealing with that are stuck here in the UK. So you can still make an application whilst in the UK, but because the centres are closed, it is not going to go very far. There are some that need to make those applications to preserve leave. Those that had appointments booked already should have received an email, and apparently the appointments will be rebooked in 6 weeks' time. We will see whether that is going to be a reality. They have brought out specific guidance for those that have visas that are expiring between basically January and March. There have been automatic, apparently, renewals, not that we've received anything, up until the end of May, and those that are visiting can. But they have set up a special unit within the Home Office called the Coronavirus Immigration Team, and the details will be further down on the slides, that you can contact to indicate that you've made applications. And it may be worth doing that to preserve leave for now. If you have an application in, then in theory your existing status remains until the application is processed. So Andy, if you can go to the next.
Oh, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. Yep.
Right. As I indicated before, there are those that have got expiring and soon to expire or have expired. There are those that are here on visitor visas and matters that they have indicated that they will extend, but there is this specific immigration team that you can contact and hopefully gain a further extension or at least preservation. The Home Office has very kindly indicated that if anyone is stuck here and were legally here in the first place, that if they're stuck and they cannot travel, but please keep evidence of all of that, that the Home Office will not treat them as an overstayer and will not issue enforcement action. And hopefully their period here will not impact any future application. We have then dealt, obviously, as Ross has indicated, with a lot of people who are dealing with furlough. So a lot of companies having to furlough lots of their staff. You can furlough those that are on visas, but please be mindful if they're here on a tier 2, you still need to keep to the minimum salary levels in most cases. So you cannot drop their wage below that. So please be aware of that. We then... the other thing that please do bear in mind, despite the fact that everyone is working from home, and if you've got new starters and new joiners, you are still required to do right to work checks. They have accepted that you can do this via video link now. So please get the individuals or the applicants to scan to you their identification documentation and then set up a video link to verify that. Please print it, sign it, indicate when you have done that. I think the key is to keep evidence if you are stuck or you are doing these things in email and written form and stuff, so that we can rely on it for later applications. So then the joy, there is a tax point. So there are a few individuals that may well be stuck here. And if any of you are counting your days for residence purposes, then HMRC has issued a little bit of guidance, in fact, less than, I would say, the Home Office. And God, I'm not sure I'm in favour of either of those entities, but there we are. So HMRC, in their wonderful wisdom, accepts that COVID-19 might be a little bit of a problem, but have only indicated that they will disregard the days that you are here, only in exceptional circumstances. It always, don't you love these sentences, depends on the facts and circumstances of each individual's case, but they will discount, if you look on the right of the slide, only in these circumstances those days that you are stuck here. So please be mindful, because it is only if you're being quarantined or advised by a health professional to isolate in the UK, only if there is government guidance that you're not to travel. We think maybe that might be the case, or you're unable to leave because the closure of international borders, or you're asked by your employer to remain here. So please be mindful. At the moment, they're only saying those circumstances. So our hope, as this status quo remains, is that we get some further guidance, particularly on the immigration side, and whether HMRC will also issue some greater ones in relation to residents, we shall see. In relation to immigration, there is a body called the Immigration Lawyers Practitioners Association who is lobbying, although we don't like to describe it as that, the Home Office to get greater guidance, because it is very wishy-washy and very limited. I think my key is stay where you are if you can. If you need to be travelling, do get in touch and we will try and help. But until they open the processing centres or dispense with the need to go through biometrics and the like, no visas are going to be processed. Thanks.
Thank you, Juliet. Hugh, let me press the right button again. There we go.
So as Ross alluded to earlier, you're going to have to front up the cash on your payroll. That's going to create issues, cash flow issues for many clients, and we would obviously therefore our minds turn to debt now and have a look at the facilities that have been offered by government. This always happens whenever there's a government-backed scheme. They get lock into conversations with the banks, have detailed talks about how it's going to operate, and then publicly start criticising one another because the government's saying you're not providing enough debt, and the banks are saying, well, you know, we don't have enough support for it. So that's starting to unfold already. So we're a week and a half into this scheme, and the government's accusing the banks of not lending enough, and the banks are saying, well, you know, we still stand to lose 20% of this. Everybody's making the point that the lender is looking for the insurance policy from the government, so they're applying for the coverage under the scheme. And the lender gets that 80% guarantee. So if you default, the government will step in and reimburse them. There's no stats on how many loans have been issued yet. I was hunting around for ages yesterday trying to see who was holding themselves out as a brilliant example of it. Clearly, there's a tension there, and the government's not happy, and the banks are still sort of sticking to their guns as a commercial enterprise. I thought the quick eligibility checklist was quite important. So your application must be for the business purposes. You must be a UK-based SME, so there is a cap of turnover of 45 million. Business must generate more than 50% of its turnover from trading activity. I'll come on to that a bit later. And the CBILS backed finance will be used primarily trading in the UK. Facilities are for up to 5 million, and the length of term is there at the top of the page. Go to the next slide. We have stressed at the beginning of this every single time, cash flow is the most important thing here. You need to be really clear about what you're asking for, why you're asking for it. Give the assumptions. Stating those really clearly is vital for them to understand and assess what you're doing. You need to show that you've really tried to reduce your costs. So talking to your landlord, talking about rent reductions. If you do already have debt, repayment holidays are being offered by the banks already. So if you're worried about servicing debt, you should be talking to your banks about holidays on that, much like the mortgage holidays that have been made available. You must be showing that you've looked at and explored all the other opportunities there, looked at your VAT deferral for your cash flow, looked at furloughing employees. They're not going to be issuing finance here that's, you know, they're going to accept going out the door as dividends. You need to be really looking at bringing your costs down as much as possible. All banks point to the support measures. Explore it first. It simply won't be acceptable, I think, to turn up to a meeting with the bank or have a call with them unaware of the other options that are available, unaware of furlough. So you need to really work through all of those and make sure you've considered them before you approach. But have a clear idea about this. If you're going on for 6 months with the cash flow issues, how quickly do you recover from it? Some of these loans are available up to 6 years. You need to try as best you can in the circumstances to plan how you're actually going to service that debt and service the interest on that debt beyond that 12 months that the government is paying for. Andy, next slide, please. So yeah, we're looking here for an assessed, considered commercial loan. Again, the press were criticising the banks yesterday. Indeed, the ministers were criticising the banks yesterday for dealing with these as a commercial loan first. That is actually a requirement. They have to consider whether they can offer it as a commercial loan before applying for that coverage. So again, detailed talks that always come up with a bit of a disagreement at the end. The worst case scenario should be considered. So I use the example of the gym. You know, loads of my friends have been cancelling their gym membership. There's calls on such businesses for significant refunds, and people like me, no-goers to the gym, are unlikely to be sort of rushing to renew our memberships at the end of this. So there will be a knock-on impact, and you need to be sort of really quite frank with yourselves, but also in your cash flow estimations here. parts of the economy have frankly been put into hibernation. So if your business is closed, you need to make it hibernate, and you need that scenario plan for how you're going to come out of it, realistically, how your revenue is going to ramp back up to normal levels. Note the 50% revenue from trading requirement. We don't believe that this will apply to cost-plus scenarios. So where you've got a subsidiary in the UK, effectively fully funded by the foreign parent, we don't believe that those loans will be available to you. So the banks do like to take security. They do stand to lose 20% if in the circumstance of default. It's very clear, though, that your principal private resident cannot be used as security under this scheme. That is a protected asset of yours. I guess one major update this week, Barclays were being quite bold last week, saying even for a £25,001 loan, they would be expecting a personal guarantee from the directors. The Big Four have now all agreed, blanket, they will not expect personal guarantees under 250. So that's a positive move. They will still be looking for some security where it's available, though. Above that, they haven't made any commitments, so presumably they are looking where it's significant debt to be tying you up into those the personal guarantees. There are no fees to access this, but the lender pays it. However, they may charge arrangement fees. So do be aware that although the headline is that there's no fee to participate, the normal banking fees will apply. Applications encouraged online, obviously, because everybody's running around trying to make this work with staff in isolation and what have you. And they stress there is no rush. So if you're okay and you're surviving, it may stand you in good stead to go along in a month or two and say, look, we are now starting to run out. This is where we're at, and we've got a bit more clarity on how our cost base is unfolding. So, key points, survival mode. I think that's the critical point that you need to take away from this. Cut non-essential costs to nil. You really need to dispense with anything that isn't core at this time that you can get out of. We understand that locally they may have, bank managers will have responsibility and a bit more flexibility up to about 250,000. So it's worth trying to keep it under that if possible. Otherwise, you really will be in for a grilling on your cash flows. I'd say apply online unless you have the ear of a decent manager. Lots of people say that they don't have a decent manager. So it just depends on the relationship that you have there, whether you want to approach them directly. And do expect that they probably won't give you all of the money up front. There probably will be a staggered drawdown. Obviously, they're trying to limit their exposure and probably will be throughout that period looking for some updates. Consider the assumptions, run them by somebody, your accountant, your peers. Try and be as brutal as possible, and then hand it to somebody who you think is going to be even worse, and cut the costs down further. You don't want to be left away at the first attempt. If you're struggling to pay the staff before the furlough grant, then there are overdraft options available. So it may be worth exploring that, knowing that you have put those staff on furlough, and it is just a temporary fix for those particular. For those costs that you need that support. HMRC, remember, is going to be the lender of first resort in terms of the VAT deferral, so do cancel those direct debits if you pay by direct debit before for your next VAT payment due. And really do not put something so discretionary as your new car through those forecasts. They are simply not going to be financing that at the moment.
Thanks, Hugh. I mean, it does feel like the banks aren't necessarily in the spirit of this, given they sort of have handouts. So I think the mood, given the press at the moment, is that there may be a shift. Maybe some of the banks will start, being a little more relaxed. But yeah.
Certainly being beaten with the 2008 stick at the moment, honestly.
One of our attendees has just made a comment that they've been talking to Barclays, who've told them that they have 2,500 applications, which they haven't, and they haven't passed one yet, but they will be clearing about 800 a day when they do. So, yeah, I expect that the criticism and the sort of singing match between politicians and the banks is quite justified at the moment.
And the lack of stats.
Guy on Radio 4, I can't remember his name. He's got 100 people business. He's furloughed everybody, and the bank have said no to him. He made a profit last year, but the year before he was break even. And they've also got some assets. They have some physical plant machinery, so therefore they can't get the loan. I mean, yeah. Anyway, let's hope this situation changes. Thanks, Hugh. So I make a joke here about the fax because HMRC have been struggling themselves as one of the least digital organizations in the world. They struggle with emails. They still have a fax machine. And I've given up trying to get hold of an inspector recently and noticed he had a fax number. So I was determined to blitz his fax machine. And then it took me 5 hours to work out how to fax it from our business because it so rarely happens now. Everyone had sort of forgotten where it was. But I think they've been struggling with the whole digital concept anyway. I'm going to run through this stuff. We know last week we didn't know. We know it works like this now. You're getting the lower of 30,000 or 80% of the total wage costs, including the pension, including the employer's NIC. So if someone earns the £30,000, then you will get completely covered. So that's at least the good news. But you've got to pay the money. You can delay the tax, but you've probably got to pay your staff, and only in exceptional circumstances with staff agreement, if you really had no cash, can we see a situation where you could delay that until you receive your money. But obviously that would put the staff in a very tricky place. Self-employed rules came out. You would have heard the comment, I can no longer justify the difference between being self-employed and employed by the Chancellor. Self-employed people, if you don't know, pay slightly less national insurance, not much. And I have to say they had to wait a week, terrified. So that feels like it's worth something. It is very similar, except for the fact you can work. So it's actually more generous in some ways than the employee scheme. But it's 80% of your trading profits. You've got to be self-employed. You've got to be still trading. You've got to have submitted a tax return. You've got a short time if you haven't to get your tax return in. If you've been doing everything neat and tidy and it's on profits, not income, remember, then, there should be good news and all well. Obviously, some people, this is not going to help, unfortunately. The little more detail on it is you can use what you earned last year or not either, or, so it's an or, you can choose, or the average of the last 3 years. You can apply and you should get it paid straight into your bank account. You can carry on working, so all good news there. There's also the help on payments on account. You can effectively perhaps reduce your payment on account. You can obviously miss the one that's coming up in July. So I think very good news generally for self-employed people. And I think it's nice to see the support there. They do pay Social Security, quite a lot, to be honest. And they don't have a lot of the other protections that people do have, like holidays and things. So it'll be interesting to see how this all pans out, but some good support there at least. So who does that leave out in the cold? I'm sorry, dividend directors. I don't think any professional has been entirely comfortable with this for a long time. But unfortunately, those who rely on dividends are not going to get helped. And I'm sorry to say it's fair enough, but you'll understand better as I explain, because it's a more technical point than I think people understand, because it's become such common practice. Everyone thinks, oh, it's the way it is. And to some extent it is, but it is a loophole, and it's an uncomfortable one. So the reason that they're very unlikely to get anything is it's a much deeper issue than they realize. Directors, the reason the loophole exists is directors are not employees. They perform director's duty, which is not work. Therefore, minimum time wage legislation doesn't apply. So it creates this loophole that you can have a CEO working 50 hours a week, earning nothing, earning £8,000 a year, and taking the rest in dividends. Dividends are supposed to be a return on capital, but because of this technical position, it's become a very popular way, because it was very tax efficient. Now it's a little bit more tax efficient. You're talking about, after all, costs of administration, because it's much more expensive to have a company maybe saving £1,000 at a wage of £50,000-70,000. Now the HMRC have tolerated this, but they came up with something called IR35. And I put this slide in because for a lot of us, I think IR35 is like, oh, you know, so did someone say IR35? Well, it is being delayed. We may have written to you, or, you know, someone would have, to say, look, much stricter rules coming in. They were introduced in the government. Well, it's all being delayed. Now, if you missed this and you didn't meet Boring Barry in the pub and all of that, you're a luckier man or lady than us. You know, it's been a very complicated thing that has been around for a long time, and it's been a very uncomfortable set of rules trying to deal with the dividend thing and trying to deal with these personal service companies that everyone set up to take advantage of the loophole. We feel, and this is, you know, coming from, shall we say, respectable sources, we all feel in the community that it might be time to shut this loophole, because it is a little bit odd. It's not something, you know, I'm comfortable ever advising a client to do. It is okay, or has been, but, you know, no wonder. It's not really employment income. You don't attract Social Security, and you are going to be left out in the cold now, which is going to be very harsh for a lot of people, unfortunately. They basically have a choice, the government. They either say, okay, we're going to help people with dividends, which they just can't. As much as anything, you know, there's no Social Security. So, you know, that would be such a complicated thing to do. And what about all the people that are just shareholders, you know, aren't owner-managed business? You know, it wouldn't be fair to tax those people very heavily when really they're just made investments and they want to encourage investment. So they're going to have to stand firm on that. A lot of people are going to suffer. But it does also mean they can finally settle this. Is a director an employee or not? Because the tax man is as bad as anyone at choosing when and when not. You know, you may be familiar, non-exec directors can't, have to go on the payroll. That's what HMRC says. It says, yes, they're employees. I don't care, they're a non-exec director, they're an employee. But then when it comes to, can you give share options, approve share options to the director? Oh, no. You know, they're not an employee. They don't work enough. So the tax man's playing the game too. So I think the whole thing is, you know, in need of an update. And that may well be coming, I would say. You know, the sense is we may come out of this and just shut that down. So the most common question, can a managing director furlough himself? Well, back to the same problem. Are directors employees? Can I do a bit of work? You know, if I'm the managing director, could I just do board meetings? You know, can I just do a bit of filing or a bit of customer catch up? So here's the thing. If you've got a payroll, and whatever that amount you're on, even if it's small, yes, the feeling is you can furlough. Can you do any work? No. You can do director's duties, a very specific thing. You know, that is not generating money, that is dealing with your accountants, filing accounts, or holding board meetings, or, you know, company secretarial matters, you know, your duties to the company as a director. And you can, as Ross mentions, do training, but that's it. You know, again, we came up in previous webinars, you know, it's going to be hard to justify if you're an owner-managed business that you're not working. It's going to be pretty hard. If there's a bunch of you, you might be able to, you know, some of them aren't. Will they police it? A lot of people have said, you know, how they work it out, well, with great difficulty. But, you know, getting back into that concept of what is the spirit of this thing. If you are taking the Michael, there's going to be backlash. You know, there's going to be, after this is all over, a lot of unhappiness about those who took the Michael. So what do? You be reasonable. You hold board meetings with your other directors. You discuss it. You take advice. You justify your reasons and you write them down. If you do that and you take good professional advice, what that always protects you from with the revenue is penalties, you know, and interest and concepts of fraud or concepts of behaving badly. If you took good advice, you held good meetings, if you did the best you can, the worst case scenario is you may be wrong, but they're only going to slap you for the tax. They're going to say, you owe some tax, maybe plus some interest. You should have paid tax. But no sort of slap on the wrist, but no sort of like, right, double penalties, you acted naughty, you did, and you didn't justify anything. So I think that's the key. That's what's going on here. There isn't a case law. We've just got to be pragmatic. And look, the ICAEW, I feel like putting the flag up, which certainly me and Hugh are members of, the Institute Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, have said basically this as much as they can. They're saying, if you look at the second paragraph, directors of family companies who pay themselves on PAYE should be eligible for the coronavirus job retention scheme. But you notice their last paragraph, we do not know yet the extent to which minor directorial duties would be disregarded, or whether the requirement that a furloughed employee should do no work would prohibit this. So our view is you're going to have to do some director's duties, so it'll probably be okay. Sorry, that's the best we got, but we can't see, it would be too much necessity behind those duties. Two other tiny little crazy tax details, but statutory sick pay, SSP. If you are a sort of owner-managed business and you have avoided auto-enrollment by classifying yourself as non-employers, you can see how deep this rabbit hole is on the concept of employment or not employment. If you then claim statutory sick pay, then you probably meaning you needed to register for auto-enrollment. Not the end of the world, but maybe not worth it to do SFP if you were trying to avoid that. And another one, if any of you are on the high income rule, what's it called? The high income child benefit charge, which is the £50,000 or more. When you lose your benefits, you may well be dropping below this, maybe reapply and get those benefits. Yeah, I think that's broadly it. On to Simon.
Great, thanks very much for that, Andy. So one of the questions that we're being asked a lot as a result of where we're all currently at is, if I can't access a CBILS and I wanted to raise money, is there an easy way to do it? I mean, there's never an easy way to raise money, but interestingly, there are some investors who are looking at investment opportunities. And of course, one of the big issues at the moment is with things in free fall, pretty much, it's almost impossible to actually sort of put a decent or a proper valuation on the company. So what we've been talking to a couple of clients about, and we want to share with you today, is the prospect of using what are known in the US as SAFEs, but are known in the UK as advanced subscription agreements. And essentially what it's not debt, but effectively an investor pays a company in advance for shares that will be allocated at some point in the future. And generally the shares, or the promise to issue shares, will be at a discount or based on the price per share in the next funding round. And normally that would be subject to achieving a certain funding target. But of course, generally what you find in an ASA is that if there's a trigger, so if that target's not achieved, there'll be a long stop date, and the investment will automatically convert at a pre-agreed price. Now, there's two schools of thought about what that long stop date should be. Should it be 6 months or should it be 12 months? In the current environment, you would be advised, if you are going to look at an ASA, to make it 12 months, just for the simple reason that once you enter into an ASA, it cannot be varied at all. And I'll come on to that point in a moment. One of the other things too, when you're looking at an ASA, is that you should actually consider whether there are any other trigger events to conversion. So for example, if you're looking at taking on investment, you enter into an ASA, and then somebody swoops in and makes an offer for the company before you've done your next funding round, should your ASA promises effectively point on a sale? And our recommendation would be yes, because that makes it even more attractive from an investment point of view. Some of the benefits of an ASA is that firstly, it's a quick injection of cash And the ASA agreements are really simple and they're very, very quick to negotiate. I mean, most of them don't run to any more than 4 pages. And for investors who are used to investing in this way, there's generally, you send them a draft. There's very, very little negotiation, maybe around the trigger events, the long stop date and the price per share. But other than that, it's reasonably straightforward. And of course, because it is not debt, there's no interest charged. And so that's a benefit to the company. And of course, once an ASA has been entered into and it's a contract for somebody to give you money, they can't ask for that money back. So that could be construed by some as a benefit. From an investor's point of view, the benefit is that the shares get issued at a discount. And so long as the ASA is drafted correctly, then the investor and the company is eligible, and the investor is eligible, either haven't maxed out their allowances, they can still benefit from SEIS or EIS when the shares are issued. And historically, until recently anyway, HMRC was kind of very reluctant to issue any formal guidance in relation to SEIS and EIS as far as ASAs go, but there has been some guidance that was released earlier in the year. But a couple of points in order to make sure or to ensure that the EIS or the ASA is EIS compliant. A couple of things you just need to ensure that the subscription monies can't be refunded, i.e. it's not debt. As I said earlier, once it's been entered into, you can't vary, cancel or assign the ASA, i.e. there is no flexibility in it at all. That's fairly unusual because as you probably know, in most cases you can renegotiate a contract if both parties are willing. But with an ASA, it cannot be varied. Otherwise, you would lose any benefit that the investor might have in relation to EIS further down the track. The other thing that clearly is that the investment is entirely at risk. There's no requirement to get advance assurance from HMRC. Andy and Hugh are probably better positioned to talk about this, but some investors will ask for advance assurance. HMRC's guidance has said that they will only consider a long stop date of 6 months, but in light of the current market conditions, and it's questionable as to whether you could do a fundraise in 6 months, we're now starting to see ASAs with 12-month long stop dates, and I think there is a lot of lobbying going on. So we'd be very surprised if HMRC a different view, although they are a beast and often operate within a void that's not necessarily connected to reality. You also just need to be aware that, as I said, one of the benefits is the money comes in now. And, once you've actually entered into the ASA and the cash has come in, then you can actually go ahead and use the money operationally within the business, and the EIS benefit accrues at the point in time that the shares are issued. One thing that you do need to be careful of when you're entering into ASAs is just check to see whether there's any restrictions in the articles or in your shareholders agreement if you have them, because obviously the shares when they're issued will be subject to any preemption rights and that sort of thing. So you just need to build or just make sure you're on top of that before you enter into the agreement, so you've got some sense of what process you might need to go through at a point in time when you actually convert the ASA into shares. So potentially for people that are looking at investment, would encourage you to consider ASAs as a reasonably neat way in the current environment to get some money in reasonably quickly. Other changes that have been announced just recently is, as you're all aware, company directors are under incredible pressure at the moment and have been placed in a really unenviable position in relation to COVID-19 and the surrounding economic turmoil. Under existing UK insolvency law, any director who continues to trade when an objective director knew or ought to have known that there was no reasonable prospect of avoiding insolvent liquidation would actually be personally liable for the company's debts unless they've taken appropriate steps to minimise the loss to the creditors. So this is what wrongful trading, and for anyone who's a director of a company, it's something that's always in the back of your mind, because it's where the protection that you get from a limited liability company actually drops away. The Chancellor, to his credit, has taken on feedback from business, and they've acknowledged that given that there is a huge amount of uncertainty amongst directors about their position as a result of COVID-19, particularly in relation to wrongful trading, they have taken the view, in terms of the Chancellor's taking the view, that there will be legislation passed that will effectively temporarily suspend the personal liability for wrongful trading to enable directors to continue to trade during the pandemic. So this is a very, very good thing. The legislation's not been passed yet, but it's expected to be fast-tracked at some point in the next fortnight or so. And when it is passed, it will be retrospective back to the 1st of March. So in the same way as furlough's been retrospective. So it just means that if you've made a quick decision as a director because you've had to as a result of the economic and circumstances arising from COVID-19, then you may not be found guilty of wrongful trading. It's important to notice, though, that doesn't limit your liability in any way for fraudulent trading. So clearly there's a fine line, but I think all directors will be somewhat relieved that there has been some relaxation, because as we all know, there is often a very, very fine line, particularly if you've run out of cash and you're at the brink of raising money. But this makes it very clear that that you will have some protection there. So I think that's.
Sorry, so yeah, just to say on the ASA, I mean, we're obviously going to be putting on our website, there's a page now for the coronavirus, and we'll be putting some updated information on ASAs to try and support startups. And indeed, I'm working with Chris Howard is to try and put something together to help people effectively pitch and funnel their ideas and find investment, but more information to update on that. So, sorry to interrupt, Simon.
No, that's fine. I've I think pretty much finished what I was going to say.
Yeah, so I guess it's just this final slide. As ever, keep to the spirit of what's going on here. It's a national and international crisis. Be reasonable, discuss, document, be pragmatic, define your purpose, define your need, and don't grab what you can and try and carry on like you work, because most can't. And as I say, this webinar, we won't do one next week. We'll use the website. We're going to be putting up guides there, and any information we can to help, guide you through this tricky situation. Simon, over to you. Sorry.
Okay, so thanks everyone for logging questions. There's a number of them. If we can't get through all of them now, we will be on the website. We will be publishing a list of all of the questions that have been asked over the series of seminars, and we'll provide high-level responses to most all of those questions. And we're hoping to work through all of that and have that live next week. But let's look at a couple of questions now. First couple for you, Ross. Please, can you talk us through what we would pay staff who are furloughed but undertaking some training?
So what the government guidance said on that is that any staff undertaking training, it's probably going to be online training during this crisis, that they must be paid at least the national minimum wage. But what they've said is, so you may need to top up the 80% of the salary under the furlough pay. So it's more for people who will fall beneath the national minimum wage based on the furlough pay if they undertake training and it ends up, so that you've got to work out how many hours they do and how that relates to what they're being paid to see if you fall below that. So you may not have to pay anything further, or you might have to pay some national minimum wage pay for those hours.
We had that question too that came in before the webinar about maternity. If someone's on maternity leave and coming back, can you furlough them? I think was the question.
Yeah, of course you can. I mean, if they're just coming back and there's no job, it could be a redundancy. So you would just be saying to you'd just be saying, well, we need your agreement to furlough.
Can they do it while they're, I think it may have been they're still on maternity. Do you know what I mean? So that,
so if they're still on maternity, one, you probably not be worrying too much about it. But if you know, you could agree with them to end the maternity leave and put them on furlough, or even you may get requests from staff who are aware that they could get more pay, and they know there's no job, that they want to return it.
Oh, we may have lost Ross.
Yes, just move to another question.
Okay, so the next question is, have there been any updates on R&D tax credit in terms of how strict, challenging, and how quickly they're processing or prioritising these payouts?
As you may know, they got completely lost last year, and it was taking 4 months, 5 months to get a payment. They reorganised. It's back to 28 days. Touch wood. From application, you should either hear or get your money by then. Sometimes you hear yes and then have to wait another 10 days. If it goes into audit, if it goes into review, that is not good. About 1 in 10 do. And I just closed one which has taken 6 months, and that's not completely unusual, because I think they just don't have the capacity to deal with the inquiries. My sense, interestingly, from talking to that inspector, was that there was a little bit of change in tone. I think you can't get R&D money if you weren't a going concern, and the rules basically said, and actually that definition was based on your last filed accounts needed to be done on a going concern basis. So it was a fairly relaxed version of going concern, but certainly you couldn't rely on the money. So I always had to be a little careful about pushing the inspectors for the money, to not seem too reliant. I noticed in this inspector, when I said to him that this is ridiculous, this company really needs the money, he was much more like, of course, absolutely, we've got to, So I think there is some politics to play there. I think it's still going to be the quickest money you can get. I don't know. It's certainly, if you can get your return in and file it, and it's a decent claim, 28 days without it being, I would say, less hassle than producing a 2-year cash flow and things like this. So if you can do it, plus it's not debt, do it. I think there's going to be strong support there to carry on that system and get the money out. I just don't know how many are going to get pinged for inquiry. As I say, HMRC can't act digitally very well, so they may well be doing less inquiries at the moment with reduced staff and things.
Great, thanks, Andy. Another question is, if you use a personal service company, is that considered self-employed for the purposes of the self-employed support?
No, unfortunately not. If you're using a personal service company, you are not self-employed. Self-employed is registering as self-employed and getting a tax return under that. A personal service company, by definition, a limited company has employees. It doesn't have partners or self-employed individuals. Whether you're a director or not a director is then that separate question about, is a director an employee? A company has directors, is a specific to companies. Companies have these people who govern it. So you are definitely not self-employed if you are within a limited personal service company, unfortunately.
Cool. Ross, are you back with us? Because I think we've got time for one more question.
Yeah.
So one final one for you, Ross. If an employee has booked holiday, can you make them take it even in lockdown, or or otherwise there'll be lots of cancellations, which will be tough on the company?
Yeah. So there's no law saying that you have to allow holidays. Allow employees to, agree to employees to cancel their holiday. So you could enforce and say, well, we've agreed it, you need to take it. It's tough luck. I think a lot of employers are taking the view at the moment that if people do cancel, they're being reasonable and allowing the cancellation. And as I said previously, I think you should look to, particularly if this goes on a little bit longer, review what entitlement your staff have left and look to encourage them to take holiday and even request that they take holiday at particular times in the year.
Cool, that's great. And then just, I think before we go, just thanks, Chris, for your comment. Chris has just made a comment about ASAs, and that is that in his experience, in his negotiations of them, he has seen them with interest charges, and he has found that there's often negotiations on warrants and reserve matters. It's interesting about the interest charge because it's not debt, and on the whole, most of the ones that we've seen are without interest, but that's not to say that it's,
that's
it's
a
black
very
and white.
interesting point, Chris, because
Yeah.
that would start indicating it is debt. So I think we need to tread cautiously there, but that's a very interesting point. Thank you.
Yeah. And then just a couple of comments from people just saying thanks very much for the webinars, and they like the cartoon backgrounds. So.
I changed mine.
I'm waiting for mine.
It was sent to you yesterday, Juliet. You just haven't caught up on the emails.
I start creeping in halfway through, so I turn it on.
You've got a nice house. I can see your lovely house behind you. If I showed what was really behind me, man's again, iniquity, whatever that word is. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Juliet. Thanks, Hugh. I hope you're all right. So, Godspeed and all that. We'll send you an email with links to the new page on the website. We're going to keep updating it. And as I say, we're going to try and help those from the startup community and everything to see if we can come up with some tools for them to get out there and survive, because probably very tough for them amongst others. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks very much, Andy. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.